So just before we press on to making these enemies move, we're going to spend a little bit of time just really quickly getting the collision with the player and the enemy working so that the player dies if they bump into anything bad, and if they bump into the goal, they beat the level. So all I've done so far is dragged an enemy sprite into the scene, and I've made a game, not a game over scene, but a scene for when we beat the level. Mine's just blank, but feel free to put anything in yours. And what we need to do is make sure that the enemy sprite has a collider on it. So we're going to add component, physics 2D, and in the interests of keeping it simple, I would advise you use just circle and box colliders, but feel free to experiment. So we've got a circle collider there on the enemy. And then on the goal, I'm going to add a box collider 2D. And I'm also going to set it to be a trigger. So a trigger means it's not physical. We can actually pass through it, but we still detect when we're overlapping it. So we can react to overlapping it, but it won't impede us. Okay, so there's the setup. We're also going to need some tags on these in a second, but we'll start the code off. We'll come back as and when we need them. So in terms of code, I'm actually putting all of this into the player controller. That's not always ideal. Sometimes you might decide that the enemy should be in charge of killing the player, the goal should be in charge of beating the level, but in the interest of just keeping it simple, keeping it in one location for now, we're going to add it into the player controller. So I've just collapsed some of the old code just so I've got a little bit of space underneath it to add the new bits. And we're going to use two functions that Unity looks for. So update, we've already used, is one of them. Update happens once a frame. We've got two more, so I'm going to add the first one. Void on collision enter 2D is a function that happens every time this object bumps into another one. That's going to have normal brackets for now, but we're going to come back to that and add in what's known as a parameter. Some extra bits of information are going to be important there. And the other function is void on trigger enter 2D. Again, empty brackets, but we may come back and amend that slightly. So what we're going to do, anytime a collision happens, for now, we're going to reload the level. And to do that, we're going to need to import another little library of code. So up at the top, I'm going to do using Unity engine.scene management, semicolon at the end. And that now gives us access to changing the scene by code. And we can do that by using scene manager dot load scene. So we can load a new scene, and in there it wants a name for that scene. So we either need to put something along the lines of level 1, but that would mean that an enemy that kills you on level 3 would bring you back to level 1 and so on, so it's a bit awkward. So instead, what we can do is get the current scene. So we can ask the scene manager again, scene manager dot get active scene, and then that's a function, so it has normal brackets open and closed after it, and then it gives us a scene back so we can get dot name from that scene. So we want to reload the scene that is currently active. And I'm just going to save that straight away, go back to Unity, give it a chance to compile, and I'm going to move my player into a wall, and you can see that the level reloads. So it's not ideal in terms of having the walls kill us, but we know the code's working. And I can bump into an enemy, and that will also reload the level. We will come back and fix that, but let's just get the trigger stuff working as well. So the trigger's slightly different. We want to go to the next level or to a congratulations screen, what have you. It still starts the same, so we're going to use scene manager.load scene because that's still what we want to do. We want to load a specific level. Then in the brackets we could again put a name, maybe, well, my scene's called win, so I could just go for that. But that would mean that every level, when you beat it, would take you to win, so it's not very reusable. The player will always go to the same scene, whether it's beating level 1, level 2, level 3. So we can future-proof it a little bit by using a variable instead that we can then set in the inspector. So we're going to have another bit of information up here with our power and our rigid body, and let's make it a public string, so it's a collection of characters, and let's call it next level. And then down here now we can load the next level instead. And save that up. Okay, so back into Unity with the player selected. Hopefully that all pulls through okay, and we can see here now in the player controller I can put the name of the next scene. So mine's called Win. Let's just try it out by putting my player over here and giving the level a go. So if I move through the goal, oops, move too far and hit the wall, move into the goal, we're not reloading any level or going to a new one because down at the bottom they've got this little error that says the scene's not in the build settings. So the scene exists, it is there, I've made the scene and saved it, but it's not in my build settings. So I need to go File, Build Settings, and just plug it in there. So I've already got level 1. If you haven't got any levels in there, I'd suggest you just put everything in there. And that means that now when I try this level and I beat the goal, hit the goal, I go to the win screen, so that's good. The next step then, let's get rid of that annoying wall depth feature. So we're going to use tags on these objects, which allow us to differentiate the enemies from the walls and vice versa. So tags just an extra little way other than the name of identifying objects. So we can do it, we can set up our code where a normal object won't kill us, but anything with a certain tag will. And to add the tag, I'm just going to click on this drop down here and click Add Tag at the bottom. I've got this list. Currently it's empty, so I'm actually going to add 2. So the first one I'm going to add is enemy. I'm going to hit the plus again, and I'm going to add goal. So we can go to the next level when we hit a goal, and we can reload the current level when we hit an enemy. And then we can reuse this tag for the enemy's bullets as well. Anything that's bad will be tagged as enemy, and it will kill us. Next step is to actually use the tags. So I've got to select my enemy again, click on the tag, and this time we've got the option of the others. So I'm going to tag that as enemy, and I'm going to tag that as goal, and I'm going to jump back to the script. So here we now need to ask a question. So we want to ask the name of the tag of the object we bumped into, which means we actually need access to that object. So we're going to evolve this function slightly. So we're going to add a parameter here in the brackets. Unity can pass us a collision 2D object, which holds all sorts of information about the collision that happens, where it happened, how powerful it was, which objects were involved, most importantly, but it needs a name, so let's call this collision. And then we can ask a question here, so I'm just going to set the question up. This uses an if statement, so we have if, and then in normal brackets we have a question, and then in curly brackets we have the response. So if we make sure it's all set up nicely, there we go. So if something, reload the level. And the something here is if the collision dot the other object, so the game object that we bumped into, dot compare tag function matches enemy, then we reload the level. So if the collision's game object tag is enemy, reload the level. And let's just quickly try that. So now I should be able to bump into a wall, which is fine, but if I bump into the enemy, the level reloads, and that's perfect. And the next step is for the trigger. We currently only have one trigger in the level, which is the goal, but it might be that later on you want some decorative items or you want the bullets to be triggers, so you don't want any trigger to just instantly beat the level. So we can future-proof it again by doing something similar. So if brackets, curly brackets, just to structure it. And then the extra information we need here isn't a collision this time. A collision doesn't happen with triggers. So we actually just get the information about the other collider. So we use collider 2D. And let's call that collider instead, because it's not actually a collision. The question's a bit simplified this time. We just ask if the collider's tag matches goal. We don't need to worry about getting the game object from the collider because it's assumed that a collider must be on a game object. So we just ask if that collider's tag is goal, load the next level. And that's actually the last step. Just double check that does still work. I've not broken it somehow. Perfect. Okay. That's the setup for the game then, really. I mean, if you're very inventive, you could build a game around that. Just have static obstacles. You could even look into Unity's animation for the sake of making moving obstacles. But it's a nice base to work on from now. So I'll see you in the next one.